Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Dr. Wolf, integrative veterinarian and food therapist for pets. I've been practicing for over a decade and I've been in the veterinary field since 2007. So I have seen a lot when it comes to pet nutrition, but I've narrowed it down to the top 7 mistakes I see. So let's jump into it. Real quick, if you want more pet nutrition and wellness videos like this one, be sure to hit the subscribe button. All right, the first mistake I see all the time is choosing a pet food based on the ingredient list. I know that this seems like a solid strategy, and it's something that we do in human nutrition all the time. If we're one of the more health conscious people that, wants to know what we're actually ingesting, it is important to read the ingredient list. But with pet food, it is a little bit different because they can manipulate the ingredient list and actually use it as a marketing tactic. One of the primary ways that pet food companies do this is by something called ingredient splitting, which is where they're going to take one ingredient, for example, peas, and they're going to split it up into different components like peas, pea protein, pea starch, and pea fiber. Once they split those peas up into those different components, they're going to weigh less and they're going to fall lower on the ingredient list. So if you're only looking at those first few ingredients and they're, some type of meat product, you might think, oh, the pet food's healthy, this is a good one. But if you read farther down on the list, you see all these different ingredients that have been split up. And that's super misleading because if they kept those all together as one ingredient, they would rise higher on the list, but that would make it less appealing to you. So they've learned this little trick of splitting up ingredients to make them fall lower on the list and make you think that the pet food is healthier than the one next to it. Some pet food companies even take it a step further and use different types of similar ingredients, like 5 different types of carbohydrates or 5 different types of legumes. And so even if those do fall lower on the list, they actually make up a really large portion of the food, even if it doesn't look that way. So we don't want to choose a pet food just because it has meat as the first ingredient, but we don't want to completely ignore the ingredient list. It's really important to understand how to read it as a whole and how to identify ingredient splitting. Okay, the next mistake I see is choosing a formula of food without understanding if it's appropriate for your pet. So if you think about it, you go into the pet store, there's like a bazillion different brands, but also each brand has a ton of different formulas to choose from. Indoor, hairball control, weight management, senior, all these different things, right? And none of these actually have any sort of regulation. There is basically one standard of nutrient values that these pet food companies have to follow. And most of those are just minimums that are required, like the minimum amount of protein, the minimum amount of vitamin A, etc. There are some maximums for things as well, but not for everything. But the point is that there's no regulation on like what is gonna be in a weight management formula, what's gonna be in a senior formula. There's no legal definitions for these things. So if you see 10 different senior diets from 10 different brands, I guarantee they're all gonna have different types of macronutrient compositions and calorie content. And similarly along those lines, I see a lot of pet parents choosing a food based on the guaranteed analysis. So the percentage of protein, for example, in the food, and they'll take 2 different foods and they'll go, okay, this one has 26% protein, this one has 28. So I'm gonna do the 28% one because that's higher, it's gotta be better. Not always the case for 2 reasons. Number 1, higher protein is not always more appropriate. It depends on your pet. If they have something like kidney disease, it's definitely not gonna be more appropriate. So you wanna understand if that's right for your pet. But number 2, you can't compare 2 foods directly to one another because you have to account for the moisture content. If one has 10% moisture and the other has 12% moisture, but the protein percentage looks the same, it's actually not gonna be the same once you account for the differing moisture content. So in order to pick the right formula for your pet, you need to understand what your pet needs, and this is not one size fits all. What a 10-pound couch potato Chihuahua needs is not going to be the same as what a super active, German Shepherd needs. So this does take a little bit of learning on your end. I have resources that can help you out with this, with feeding your pet based on their unique life stage, puppy, senior, adult, and their unique needs, whether they are obese prone or a highly active dog. You can learn all about this in my short mini course called The Perfect Pet Food Blueprint, linked in the description below if you're interested. Okay, the third mistake I see is buying giant bags of food, especially for smaller dogs. I know that it may be more economical to buy a larger bag of food, but the longer that that food stays open, it is being exposed to air, it's being exposed to light, potentially heat depending on where it's stored, and the longer that goes on, the higher the amount of oxidized fats your pet is going to ingest. Oxidized fats are essentially rancid fats, and these are really bad for your pet's body. They're gonna increase oxidative damage, which is linked to chronic disease and cancer. So we wanna make sure that the kibble they're eating is as fresh as possible, and you can ensure that by throwing out anything that's been open for longer than like 4 to 6 weeks, and making sure that you store it in the original bag, sealed and rolled tight with all of the air removed, and then also put that inside of an airtight food storage container. And of course, buy a smaller bag if you have a smaller dog. Now, if you are buying a really large bag of food, you might actually also be making this next mistake, which is dumping the food into a plastic storage container. Number one, like I just mentioned, we are exposing that kibble to air and to light, so that's gonna oxidize those fats quicker. And we're also allowing that food to contact plastics, which are not totally inert. They've got chemicals. We know about microplastics now, right? Those things are going into the food, and your pet is ingesting those chronically if you're doing this every single day for years on end. So like I mentioned, if you do feed kibble, we wanna keep it in its original bag, roll it up tight to get the air out, use a chip clip or something to keep it closed, and then you can also put that inside of an airtight container. The airtight container can be plastic as long as it's not contacting the food. And this same thing actually also goes for homemade food. I see a lot of people who do homemade diets for their dogs, and they store it in plastic bags or plastic containers. And if you're putting that food in there warm, or you're warming up the container, that's going to just speed up the breakdown of that plastic, and your pet's gonna be ingesting those chemicals and those microplastics. So typically I suggest opting for glass if you can. If you absolutely have to do plastic, just make sure that the food is cooled before you put it in. Okay, next mistake is assuming that higher price equals higher quality. There is no regulation on pet food pricing. Any pet food can say, I want to call this pet food premium for whatever reason they want and charge a premium price. It does not automatically mean it's actually premium, which also has no legal definition or regulations. Pet foods can charge whatever they want, and price does not indicate quality. In order to really know the quality of a pet food, there are so many different things we have to look at, like who formulated the food, what is their level of expertise, what is the actual nutritional content in the food, and we also want to know things like what is their quality control? Are they testing for mycotoxins? Are they testing for heavy metals? Are they testing for pathogens? Like all of these things that can contribute negatively to your pet's health over time are important things that we should consider when we think about the quality of a pet food. All right, moving on to the last common mistake I see all the time, and that is free feeding. You might hear from some people that dogs will self-regulate, they will stop eating when they're full, but this is absolutely not the case, and especially not with kibble, which is really calorically dense. Your dog is most likely not going to self-regulate, especially if they're eating dry food. So you have to know exactly how much your pet needs to eat on a daily basis in calories, and you need to portion that out. Now that can either be putting the entire amount into the bowl in the morning and they graze on it throughout the day, or that could be, splitting that up into 2 or 3 meals, which is what I typically suggest. Free feeding your dog, free feeding your cat, using something like those gravity feeders for cats, that is just gonna contribute to obesity, and obesity is going to shorten your pet's lifespan. It's gonna increase their risk of chronic disease, and it's going to increase your vet bills by at least 25 to 30%. Plus you're wasting money on excess food that they shouldn't be eating. So no free feeding, meal feeding only. Now, if some of these mistakes sound familiar, or you're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm doing one or more of these, please don't feel bad. I've definitely made a lot of these mistakes in the past, but it's really just about empowering ourselves and educating ourselves with more information so we can make better choices and better habits for our pets. If you found this video helpful and you want more ways to build healthy habits for your dog or cat, I've linked some of my favorite resources in the description below, and I'd love for you to leave a comment as well with other topics you'd like me to cover in the future. See you next time.